Lauren, you had a career that it's very enviable in many regards. But I'm going to hone in on the fact that you found a place early on in your career that you just loved. You spent a bulk of your career there. You had a lot of success there. So can we just take a moment and talk about IBM? Can we talk about what you learned and all the ups and downs and twists and turns of your time at one of the world's most, it's a global brand, right? It's a premier global brand.
Yeah. So, Ruben, it's really great to be talking to you today. I actually joined IBM when I graduated from university. And kind of the fun thing about it is I graduated in the 1970s, and I had studied at Wharton, and I had studied computer coding at Wharton.
Right.
Believe it or not. And, my mom and dad were really keen on, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? We don't understand these computers. And so, the job market was not as clear for tech people back then.
Right.
But
yeah.
IBM came on campus, and I talked it over with my father. He said, well, I know what IBM is. So, thumbs up to that. And so I got a fantastic job at IBM as a systems engineer, which was a technical job in the sales organization, working with clients to help them implement, at that time, mainframe hardware and software in New York City. I loved it. So I did that job for a number of years, and then I was promoted to be a manager of systems engineers on Wall Street, which was like the dream job.
Oh, yeah.
And,
right.
And I worked with great iconic companies like the New York Stock Exchange and Depository Trust and Morgan Stanley, and we did some amazing things. But the great thing about IBM is that you can do basically anything you want. IBM is a very large company. It's got a lot of different businesses, and it's a company in constant transformation.
Yeah.
So, after I did that stint, I had my daughter, and I was wondering, what should I do next? I don't know if I want to commute into the city every day. And it was about the same time that PC LANs became really prevalent. And I talked to one of my mentors, and he said, Lauren, everybody expects you to come back, work in Poughkeepsie, do mainframes, but why don't you do something different? And so I left my place of comfort, a place that I was known, a place that had my reputation, and I made my way into PC LANs, later called client server, which morphed into the internet, and eventually in my career to cloud computing. But it was the beginning of me doing entrepreneurial work with a large established company. And it was exciting. The work was hard, right? You have to figure out in tech, is this a fad or is this going to stick, right? Yeah. And then the big company, how does this fit in our business model? How does this fit in our culture? How do you take the bet? Where do you invest? What products you should develop? What is your narrative? What's your go-to-market strategy? I got the chance to work on that in the whole PC LAN client server era, and I really loved it. It kind of gave me a sense that, you can do anything you want, but you have to be willing to keep taking the risk, stepping out of your comfort zone, learning, and doing the next thing.
Does that come naturally to you? Is that intuitive? Like you just. What am I trying to ask you here? Are you like intuitively a little bit more risk seeking, or is it risk adverse, but it just happens to be a great opportunity and you keep going? Like, how would you? I'm not sure if I framed it correctly, but are you sensing where I'm trying to take that?
Yeah, I actually can't answer that question, but because I think about it a lot. Yeah. I don't think of myself as a risk taker. Although I do take a lot of risk, if that makes sense.
It does.
But I do think of myself as someone who tries to stay current and relevant, and in tech, up with the latest of what's developing. And I think over my career, I've had a good sense of what's really going to take off, even if it's not clear. And I will take that risk. And I think I take the risk because it's also intellectually challenging and very interesting. And I am super curious. And you could take risk at IBM because, after a number of years, I had a reputation. I was a known quantity. I could take risk, and the risk might not be, as high stakes as if you're going from place to place to place, although it could affect your reputation. And then I became known for being willing to take risk and take assignments that were not necessarily, well understood or formulated. But I could work in the ambiguity and, be able to look out around me and see, I really think this is going to happen. And I'm willing to take a bet and get in early and be part of it.
I love that. And you were part of IBM, not only IBM, but at such iconic times, the late 70s, the 80s, Lou Gerstner shows up. I mean, it was just such an interesting, it's like a living case study, right, of American business and tech business and what you did right there, not you, but what the company did right, the bets that didn't go well, the reorgs. I mean, super interesting. If you're curious and you are a lifelong learner, what an immersively rich environment.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I really love about that journey, in addition to the technology and the learning, there were a couple other things that I think were really very special for me. One was to be able to be a global executive.
Yeah.
I was really nervous about that. Here I am, I'm an American woman. I'm an African-American woman, and I need to go out and meet with clients all over the world. In Europe, in Asia, in India, in Latin America, Australia, and how would they receive me? And also, could I do everything right? You understand, right? Everybody's got their different cultures and customs, and
right.
Could I show the right cultural acumen when I was in situations with senior people? And it worked for me. And it worked for me in a way that I didn't really expect. The first was that people would say to me, it doesn't matter if you get everything right. All we want is for you to try. Right.
Interesting. Okay.
And so I did. And the second thing was I learned after a very long time that people perceived me as an American executive coming in with value. Right. It was more important. What was the value that Lauren was bringing to this customer situation? And she was bringing the strength of an American corporation with her. And so as I thought about that, it actually went back to the time that I was a very young girl growing up in Connecticut in a place that I was an other. My parents were Bostonian, but they moved to Connecticut for opportunity. And so there were very few people who looked like me throughout, my elementary and high school years. But my parents always taught me that, what do you bring? What are your skills? What is your value? What is the thing that differentiates you? And by the way, for me, it was math.
Interesting. Right. Yeah.
I was a little math nerd.
A brilliant mind. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I always understood that when you're an other and you go into a situation, you need to have something that's of value for the person, the other people, for me too, but for the other people, and also respect, right? Because I was going into cultures that weren't necessarily my culture. And I think that served me really well when I was an IBM global executive. But the thing about it also, Ruben, was I grew so much doing that.
Yeah.
Working all over the world, meeting with other people, understanding what was common. We had the same goals, the same dreams. And I'm not the person that I was before I did that. And I really love having that ability to grow.
I love how you connected your childhood, the otherness of your childhood to the global executive. Do you think facing some, I'll use my words carefully, maybe some adversity or there's some things you had to navigate early on in life that others didn't. Do you think that served you well at your IBM career? Do you think like some of those skills, I think you referenced it a little bit. I just want to see if I can connect some more dots there. Do you think that served you well at your career in IBM, showing up, looking for value, showing up, how can you be of service, sensitive to others, inclusive of others? You took something that was hard and you turned it into something that was powerful.
Absolutely. And I've thought a lot about that. And I've actually spoken to a lot of young people about that as well. I didn't, well, first I had great parents. Let me have a shout out. My dad's still living. He's 91. I can't wait till he watches this video. So I had great parents, and my parents were professional parents. And so they had a roadmap for me to follow. But, you know, my parents moved a lot, right? So I had to deal with a lot of change. I had to deal with really being at times maybe the only kid in the class who was another. And so I had to navigate that. I was a shy girl. And so I had to navigate, how am I going to break out of that? And I couldn't really participate at the time in a lot of the social things that my friends did, because back in the 70s, you know, it's not like today where everybody does everything. It doesn't really matter. Right. And so I had to come through that. Yeah. Oh, and I had great teachers and I was in a great school. Right. So I had to come through that, you know, with strength and a sense of identity. And while you don't know it at the time, I learned later that, you know, this whole idea of, well, why are you special? You know, how do I fit into this situation when I'm not part of the majority?
Yeah.
You know, how do I square it with myself?
Yeah.
You know, in terms of my authenticity, you know, which my father helped me work through. My authenticity was, you know, bringing my A game, bringing my skills, you know, bringing value to the table. And that has grounded me for my entire life, I would say, Ruben.
So you become a global VP at IBM and you're traveling the world, and you're having these amazing experiences and growing tremendously. And then your husband at some point decides to retire, right? And the only reason I bring it up is because we had a conversation about this. I thought it was super interesting because that triggered some thinking for you, correct?
Yes. My husband and I met when we were systems engineering managers in 1984. We met at an IBM conference. We were married shortly after, 6 months to be specific.
Yeah.
Married 38 years now. And so he worked at IBM for 31 years and he retired. We kind of had an agreement that at 55, we would think about retiring. He retired at 55. I wasn't really quite ready for that, so I kept working. But, you know, my husband, right before my very eyes, became relaxed, young,
right,
you know, fit. He was involved all over the community. He always had been, but he was much more involved working with the Red Cross. He was president of a nonprofit. And, you know, I was still working and enjoying myself, but honestly, you know, I was exhausted. Right. I was stressed out. You know, I never stopped working. And I was like, what about, you know, he could wake up when he wanted to. And so it triggered some things in me, you know, as to why can't that be for me too? But it was scary because I had been at IBM all my career.
Yeah.
I knew how to do that. I knew how to work full time. And I wasn't sure if I stepped out of it, if I could be as successful as he was, because he had already been working with the nonprofit and volunteering with the Red Cross and doing a whole number of things. So he had something to step into that he could grow, but I really didn't have that.
So this is a pivotal moment because we're building up to a pretty courageous decision, right? Because yes, you're right. There is a lot of stress. There is a lot of work. Your life, in some ways, is not quite your own when you're at that level working for a corporation, right? I mean, there are a lot of people that you're feeding into, and they're feeding into you, and so forth.
That's right.
And I would also imagine it's a big entrenched identity at that point. You've been with a company for decades. You're a global VP. That carries respect. You obviously have credibility, relationship capital, impact, influence. It's not just like leaving a job. You're leaving a life behind.
I'm leaving Lauren as she was known to be and who I was.
Yes.
Right. I had to let go of that. It was really scary.
How do you navigate that? I mean, did that happen very quickly? Was it more of a period of time where you began to let go? How does one navigate that? Because I don't think you're the only one right now looking around the landscape saying, I'm going to have to leave behind what's familiar and the version of myself that I'm very comfortable with. What did that look like for you to start to navigate out? And was there a pivotal moment? Was there like a pivotal moment?
I wish I could tell you that. I executed it beautifully, Ruben.
Thank God you did. If you didn't, thank God, because people need to see something different than the Instagram version of life.
So I thought I was dwelling on this for 3 years at least. So I just want to put some time on it.
Yeah.
You know, I was even dwelling on it before my husband Ken left IBM, and I had a date in mind, and I didn't execute on it. And the company had asked me to do something even beyond when I had kind of signaled that I wanted to retire, and I signed up for it. It was the right thing to do to sign up for it, but partially, you know, I also didn't want to deal with how to make this transition.
Yeah.
And I was very worried about, you know, what it would be like. I just really, I didn't have any way to think about it. I couldn't even look to my father, who's my lifelong, you know, mentor and my role model. He started his own tax business, right? And I didn't want to start a company. So what happened, if you don't mind if I tell this fun story,
yeah,
is that my husband loves cars. He collects 1960s muscle cars.
Very cool.
And a friend of ours had done this sport called the Great Race, which is a cross-country competitive rally driving.
It's like a cannonball of some sorts.
Yeah, like a cannonball in cars that are older than I think 1974. So, you know, some people driving cars from 1916, just to give you a sense.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So friends of ours had asked if we would do it. And, you know, my husband really wanted to do it. And my girlfriend actually didn't want to do it. She thought I would say no, so she could tell her husband no. But I said, why not? You know, let's do it. And that race was from Maine to Florida, just to give you a sense of how you know, on the race, I was meeting people from all walks of life, in all stages of life. And they were doing quite well, and they weren't working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
Yeah. And,
you know, and they were wearing shorts, and that sounds really funny, but, you know, people like, Ron, one guy ran a company, Coker Tires, Corey Coker. And, you know, he was also a race sponsor. And he had like the most relaxed, I'm sure his lifestyle wasn't totally relaxed. He was CEO, but it was more relaxed than what I was used to, buttoned up in a suit, you know, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And on this race, I thought to myself, there are other ways to live, and they can be quite nice.
Yeah.
And so I returned to the office, and I announced to just my management team, not the whole company, of course, that I intended to retire.
Okay.
Right. Now.
It's courageous, right? You had that, 30 seconds of insane courage, right?
Right. Now I'm terrified.
Right. Like, yeah.
What does that mean? And so I'm a lifelong learner. I just love learning. And I had just completed a program at Columbia, an executive ed program, to kind of refresh my skills in, strategy and decision theory, et cetera, particularly when I became the chief technology officer for IBM corporate strategy when we were working on cloud. And so, I thought maybe a university setting would be a good way for me to transition. And at the time, although there are more programs like this now, there was a fantastic program which several of my colleagues attended called the Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative. And the idea was, in your third stage of life, your first being learning, your second being earning, your third being serving, what are you going to do to take the sum of your experience and have an impact, a differentiated impact on others? And so the fellowship was a year of thinking about what that would look like in the form of a project. It was a year of learning different systems. How does public sector work? How does social mission work? How do people start stuff? How do you work your way through the messy middle? To quote the founder of that program and our professor, Rosebeth Moss Cantor, which everybody knows Rosebeth and her stellar career at Harvard. And how do you have impact, and how do you do it in a sustainable way? And it was also a year to reflect, and several people encouraged me to go there and to be open, to not to go there with, okay, I know the end of this is I'm going to do X, but to go in as with a blank slate and say, I'm going to let it evolve. I'm going to let it evolve. And one of my colleagues said, and while you're at it, why don't you take a couple of liberal arts classes?
Round two, right.
Which, by the way, you take the social sciences or music and writing, really, they help you think.
That's right.
I took education policy, I took education, entrepreneurship and innovation and stuff like that. But I let myself be open. Now, it sounds like I did that easily. Man, I was a mess. I'm like,
really? Okay, right. Because I was picking up on, I love the fact that you chose a structured environment to transition into, right? It wasn't like I went from global VP to sitting at home with nothing. It seems like it was. Right. But tell me about that. You were a mess. Super interesting.
Yeah, it took me at least 6 months to get myself together. So, first of all, I was exhausted. I didn't actually know what it was to be exhausted. I thought that was normal. Mm-hmm. And so, there was a whole period of, you got to learn to start taking care of yourself. Then, of course, with my normal type A personality, I decided I can't let it really be open. I've got to start pursuing some things. Oh. And so I had been looking at board work, but, I started doing board interviews. I was totally confused because I didn't know if I even wanted to be on a board, but I did not want to engage, in all that. And then I had an identity crisis because I didn't know, this is very silly. Well, how do you sign your emails? Like, hi, I'm Lauren States, and I don't bring the gravitas of IBM, global executive, and particularly if I want to make impact, and I show up and I say, hey, I'm just this person. I've got this history, but right now I'm just this person, and I want to help you. And they're like, well, what do you bring? Beside you.
What you bring back to what that. I bet that email signature box was pretty hard, right? I bet that was. So always the small things, right? It's always the small things that kind of hit home, right? Yeah.
Right. So my one of my BFFs who had left IBM a couple years before I did and was further along in her journey, met me at the local Westchester Mall one Saturday afternoon. We sat there having coffee, trying to figure out what's my signature line going to look at. Ruben, honestly, it sounds so silly now. And honestly, even now today, I honestly don't care. But at the time, I couldn't deal with it.
No, it was letting go. What I'm hearing, letting go. Was there some grief involved?
Yeah, a lot of grief.
Yeah.
And that reminds me, there's a really fabulous professor at Harvard Graduate School of Education, and she talks about exits.
Yeah.
And I went to hear her speak, and basically what she said is that you've got to go through the grief cycle when you exit.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that. I thought I would retire from a fantastic career. I'd start Harvard, reset, let's go.
Yeah.
But I grieved. Yeah. I grieved the loss of the life I lived. I left a lot of friends. I left, work I cared about. And so I finally let myself grieve, understanding that it was in a cycle and it would pass. And one of the things that she would say is that you can't rush it, right?
Yeah.
You have to let yourself work your way through it.
That's right.
And then there was a day I woke up, it was probably in the summer, and it had passed.
It had passed. Yeah, because what you were really grieving too was like your meaning, your value, your meaning, your identity. Those are existential. Those are big. So you came out of that on the other side, and give us some final words of wisdom. What when you came out of that valley, where are you now? What lesson, would you like, anything you'd like to leave behind?
Yeah. So it all worked out great, by the way, because I let it and I was patient.
Yeah.
Things came to me and some things I tried and I let go.
Yeah.
But I feel like I've created, a very, a multi-portfolio.
Yeah.
A set of things I'd like to do. And if I can share with you,
please.
One of the, I was hiking one day with one of my classmates, and he also was an executive prior to this program. And we're trying to figure out how to think about the rest of our next phase of our journey. And we came up with this 3-lane highway, right? And lane 1 was same act, different stage.
Okay.
By which I mean, I can keep still going with my professional career, and I can keep achieving my full potential, and I can keep growing and reinventing myself. So I've reinvented myself to board director, to cybersecurity governance expert, right? To working as a director in privately held software company.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of doing the same thing, but it's on a different stage.
Sure.
And that's okay. I did not have to let that go. The second lane was new act, new stage, right? Let's do something you really don't know how to do.
Yeah.
And, and that's where most of my nonprofit work is. I've tried some, micro consulting, coaching, getting involved with different organizations, advising. Some of it has really worked for me. Other things have not worked. It wasn't what I thought it was. I didn't really like it. Maybe it was too demanding. But the great thing about that lane is that it's also opened up networks. And in these networks, other things, start to present themselves. And I love that because I think, in this phase of my life, I want to try. There's so many things out there, Ruben.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a big, broad world.
Yeah.
And I want to experience more of it. And so this kind of like new act, new stage has helped me continue to grow in areas that I've and have impact. This is where I do my nonprofit work.
Yeah.
The high impact work that I prepared for when I was in the Harvard program. And this is also where I flourish in a way in terms of other opportunities, other networks. And the third lane, really important lane for me, let's stay busy 24/7. I call life. And this is the lane that, I do car racing with my husband. I take time for myself. I hike. And I honestly had to do that intentionally.
Yeah.
Because if I didn't, that lane wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
And then I would be almost the same as I was before, doing different things, of course, but not taking advantage of part of why I wanted to transition which was to have more time. Right.
That third lane is like the cup of tea on a Tuesday afternoon.
Right.
For me, right?
Right.
It also hits me as like the lane you probably have to defend the most. Is that true? Is that the one
I do
intentional about and defend the most from the other two?
Yeah, and I have to defend it from my instinct is to just do everything.
Right. From yourself. Yeah.
So it has to be intentional for me to look at and say, there needs to be space to do these things, Lauren. You can't just say yes to every single thing. So, you asked me, so what would I say? The first thing I would say is to trust yourself, because everything that made you successful will still be there with you as you transition. The second thing I would say is really be open. I think a lot of corporate executives are very structured, they think forward, they have a very good sense of what's going to happen next. I let all that go and I let myself be open. And I even pushed myself to do things that I wouldn't normally do, like, take a class in music, for instance, right? To experience that. I'd also say that you have to do the hard work to really understand who you are. I call it the archaeological dig, when I speak to students. And for me, it was, what did I want? Because I was very good at what did I think I want and what did everyone else want for me. And so I was always kind of quick to say, well, everybody would expect me to do this, and I think I expect me to do it, so I'm going to do this. And instead I said, you really have to think, what do you want, right? And then do it. Give yourself permission to do what you want, not do what everyone expects you to do, right? Which becomes ingrained in who you are, so you expect it too, right? And the last thing I would say is that for me, the basis of it has always been learning and growing, and not coming into this next phase thinking that, well, I don't need any new skills. I don't need any new expertise. I always keep reaching. I decided as a board director to get cybersecurity certified. Recently got my certification in financial technology. I'm always scanning to see, and I take classes at Harvard X, and Coursera and stuff to learn history, right? So it's not just professional skills, right? That curiosity, that learning has been a foundation for me my whole life, and it's served me well. Oh, and one last thing, be patient with yourself.
Yeah, be kind to yourself. Be kind to your future self.
Yeah, that's my story.